so much for this invitation to present to the NephCure community. We're really excited to be here. I am Kathryn Argue. I'm the Deputy Program Manager, and I'm joined here today by Dr. Cecilia Dupache, who is the Program Manager, and we also have Jenny Meddert-Young, who is a representative from our Public Affairs Office. So we're really excited to tell you a little bit more about CDMRP and more specifically about the peer-reviewed medical research program and the opportunities that we have for this coming fiscal year. Next slide, please. So this is just a little bit of an outline of what I'll be talking about today. First, we'll go over just the general overview of CDMRP, or the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Programs. We'll talk about the program cycle and review process that is common to all CDMRP programs, and then we will get into the specifics of the peer-reviewed medical research program, the funding opportunities and the application process for those opportunities that we have for this year, and then conclude with some tips for successful application. Next slide, please. So the overall vision of CDMRP is to transform healthcare through innovative and impactful research. And we really focus on the innovative and impactful part of that vision statement because that's really what sets us apart from other funding organizations. We strive to not just fund research for research's sake. There are other places and homes for that type of research, but we really want to fund the type of research that is going to have more of a direct impact in patients' lives. So when thinking about drafting an application for CDMRP, make sure to keep in mind throughout your application how you can think about what is different about the research that you're proposing that is going to help drive the field forward and eventually get to something that will assist patients. And it looks like we may have lost the slides.
Yeah, bear with me just a moment.
No worries. All right, I can see them back again. All right, so we accomplished our vision through our, can we go back to the previous one for just a moment? It's okay. All right. So we accomplish our vision through our mission, which is to responsibly manage collaborative research that discovers, develops, and delivers healthcare solutions for service members, their families, veterans, and the American public. And the phrase about service members, their families, veterans, and the American public is really important because this is how we define relevance to military health, is the health of all of these groups of individuals. So when we speak about military health, it doesn't have to be just the health of service members. Rather, it includes service members, what they think their healthcare will be like after their service concludes, and knowing that their family and friends are safe back at home because that contributes to military readiness. So it's a very broad definition that includes all of these groups. Next slide, please. Just a few more hallmarks about CDMRP that I want to point out. I'm not going to read through all of these, but I'll point out a few of the key ones and you can peruse as I'm talking. So one really important thing is that all of the funds managed by CDMRP are added by Congress to the DoD bill. So we do not have any say directly from the program office in the programs that are given to us by Congress or the amount of the appropriation for our programs. All of this is based on lobbying efforts and then is added by Congress to the DoD budget. Since we receive a DoD budget on an annual basis, for all of our awardees, we fully obligate all of the funds upfront. That means that if you apply for, say, a 4-year award, you'll receive access for the full 4 years of funding right up at the start of the award, with a few exceptions, but for the most part, they're fully obligated upfront. And then I also really want to highlight our collaborative efforts with both consumers and other funding organizations. So consumers, that's what we call those with lived experience for the disease or condition, and we treat them as the true north of CDMRP. As Britta mentioned in the introduction here, it's through the lobbying efforts that we get topic areas and programs added to CDMRP by Congress. And so we really keep that in mind throughout our funding process, that the reason we're here is because of those advocacy efforts, and we want to make sure that we're encompassing their wants and needs throughout the program cycle. And then I also want to talk about our relationship with other funding organizations. We seek to be complementary and not duplicative. So where this is really important is that if you submit the same proposal to both CDMRP and another funding organization, and you're fortunate enough to have both of those recommended for funding, you will have to, at the end, make a decision of which one you would like to move forward with, because we will not fund the exact same research being funded by somebody else. Next slide, please. All right, so since our funding comes on an annual basis, we also adapt our program strategy every year on an annual basis so that we can change in response to whatever Congress has given us for that year. All of our funding opportunities are publicly announced and competed. All of these opportunities are open and fair competition. And that's really important, because one of the ways we really highlight the open and fair competition is by not doing anything that would be perceived as giving a single applicant a competitive advantage. So unlike, say, the NIH, we don't do a lot of individual consultation with applicants, or really any consultation with applicants on a one-on-one basis to help them tailor their proposal. Instead, we give a lot of information in our program announcements. They're very, very dense. And then we do webinars like this that kind of go to a general audience, broad audience, to make sure everyone is receiving the exact same information and everybody has the same fair chance to compete for our funding opportunities. And then once again, we cannot overemphasize the importance of impact. So as many times as you hear that referenced throughout this webinar today, you should be thinking about it when you're writing that proposal, of how you can really drive the impact of the proposal home, how the research is going to make a difference for those affected by the disease or condition. Next slide, please. This is the full list of the FY24 CDMRP programs. You can see that there's 2 brand new programs that were added for FY24 that had not previously been under CDMRP. That is the arthritis program and the glioblastoma program. And then over on the right, you'll see the peer-reviewed medical research program. It's a little bit of a unique program under CDMRP, since it's not focused on a single disease or condition, and instead operates under the premise of topic areas. I'll be explaining that a lot more as we go on. This is the largest of the CDMRP programs, and it will be the main focus of the webinar today. Next slide, please. All right, so now we're going to get into the program cycle and review process. We can go to the next slide, please. This is the overall program cycle, which starts every year with our receiving our appropriation from Congress. So for those of you that are closely tracking, you may have noticed that the appropriation was a bit delayed this year due to a series of continuing resolutions. So as soon as we have that appropriation and it's been signed into law with the DoD appropriations bill, that's when we can release our funding opportunities. We cannot release until we have that signed bill. Once the funding opportunities are released, all CDMRP proposals require some sort of a pre-application. It'll either be a simple one-page letter of intent, or it'll be a little bit of a more extensive pre-proposal. And the pre-proposals do require that you receive an invitation before you proceed with submitting a full application. If the pre-application is just an LOI, as soon as you submit that letter of intent, you can immediately proceed with submitting your full application without needing to wait for any sort of invitation or anything like that. Once we have the applications received, we move into our 2-tier reviewed process, which I'll be explaining more in a few slides. And then following the second tier of review, the funding recommendations go out. It is the commanding general of Medical Research Development Command that has the signing authority for our recommended for funding list. So once the commanding general has assigned, the awards can be negotiated and made, and then they move into their period of performance. One thing I want to highlight here is just a little bit about the timeline between the funding opportunities being released and the applications being submitted, which is the stage that we're in right now, and when you will finally receive notice that you have been recommended for funding and ultimately the funds. It is kind of a lengthy cycle, so you can reasonably expect that it'll be approximately a year before you will actually have the funds in hand for any awards that are made under the FY24 program. Next slide, please. I think we skipped one. Can we go back one? There we go. So this is a slide covering a little bit about our two-tier review process. Peer review is the same peer review that you all probably know and love and are very familiar with. It is a scientific review of the proposal. One thing that's a little bit different about our peer review is that we do not have standing peer review panels. This is one of the reasons that we require the pre-applications, is so that we know what kinds of research are coming in that year, and the panels can be newly generated to have the best expertise to address the proposals that are received for that year. So there's no standing panels. And the other thing that is a little bit different is that scientific merit peer review scores are an absolute score. During peer review, we do not ask the panels to directly compare the applications to one another. Instead, they're comparing the application that they're reviewing against more of an idealized application that they have in their mind. Following peer review, you will receive a summary statement and your peer review score. However, do keep in mind that your peer review score is not reflective of your standing against the other applications, since it was not yet directly compared. Then we move into our second stage of review, which is the programmatic review, and that is where more of that direct comparison is going to happen. During programmatic review, our programmatic panel is going to look very heavily at the strengths and weaknesses that were pointed out by the peer reviewers, and they're also going to look at some additional programmatic criteria, such as the intent to the award mechanism, the relevance to the program, and the relative impact. And they're also going to consider portfolio balance to make sure that they're not funding too much of the same thing within a given fiscal year. So following programmatic review, the outcome of that will be the funding recommendations letters that will let you know whether or not you've been recommended for funding. Next slide, please. I briefly mentioned this up at the beginning, but I just want to reiterate that we involve consumers or those with lived experience throughout the program cycle. So consumer reviewers are full voting members of both the peer and programmatic review panels. They have the exact same weight in their scoring as that of the scientific and clinician reviewers. And they're also involved in the program right up front when we're developing the program announcements. We solicit information from those with lived experience to find out the most about their needs so that we can make sure that we're hitting that mark for impact and really addressing what the patient most wants to see funded. Next slide, please. All right, so now we'll get into the specifics of the peer-reviewed medical research program. Everything that I said up until this point is pretty general to all CDMRP programs, and now moving forward will be the specifics of just PRMRP. Next slide, please. So PRMRP was first initiated in 1999, and we have fairly generally broad congressional language. What it states is that we should support research of clear scientific merit and direct relevance to military health in specified topic areas, and then it lists the topic areas. It does not give us anything more prescriptive than that. Next slide, please. So here's the full list of the 42 topic areas that were assigned to PRMRP for FY24. It is written into our congressional language that we fund within and only within these topic areas. So since that's signed into law, it is by law that we only fund within the topic areas. There's also no pre-allocation of funds to any one single topic area. Rather, it's the entire pool of PRMRP, which is $370 million for FY24, is going to be split across these 42 topic areas based on the merit of the proposals that we receive under each. Just want to briefly point out, even though it's probably not the primary focus of this audience here today, we do have 4 new topic areas for FY24 that had not previously been offered under PRMRP. And those are the ones highlighted in blue: accelerated aging processes associated with the military, computational biology for precision health, congenital cytomegalovirus, and far UVC germicidal light. Next slide, please. So to deal with topic areas that change on an annual basis and also that are quite diverse in terms of the research areas that they represent, we take a portfolio-driven approach where topic areas are grouped together based on commonalities and the needs and gaps that are most needed to be addressed for those topic areas. So you'll see them for the most part organized by research area or physiological system. Occasionally, we get topic areas that are more of research tools rather than a disease or a condition. An example of one of those is proteomics. So in that case, you'll see the proteomics topic area spread across all of the different portfolio options. Next slide, please. All right, and then this slide is giving you a little bit of a preview of the funding mechanisms that we'll be offering for FY24. I will be explaining these in a lot more detail in upcoming slides. We do have 6 that span from basic research all through clinical trials and clinical research. What this slide really is meant to highlight is that we cover the entire spectrum of research from bench to bedside for all of the topic areas and all of the portfolios. So all of our award mechanisms are open to all portfolios and all topic areas under those portfolios. Next slide, please. All right, where the portfolio really comes into importance for the applicant is that we derive strategic goals at the portfolio level. So if you remember, I said that we advocate and for and take the input of those with lived experience into account when we're developing our program announcements. This is where they really play a large role, is in the development of the strategic goals along with other key stakeholders of the program. So within the program announcement, you're going to see the portfolio listed, then you'll see the topic areas aligned to that portfolio, and then you'll see the continuum of care listed. And under each element of the continuum of care, we have a series of bullet points, which are the strategic goals for that portfolio. So there will be strategic goals under foundational studies, prevention, diagnosis, treatment, and/or epidemiology. Next slide, please. All right, so I'm highlighting and giving you a snapshot of the strategic goals for the internal medicine portfolio, since that is likely to be the one of the most interest to this group. And you can see, I know I'm not giving you enough time to really fully read these strategic goals, but they are in all of our funding opportunities. And also you should have the slides provided after this webinar. It's fine if those are sent out and shared so that you can look at these a little bit more carefully. But just want to highlight that we have 3 under foundational studies, 1 under prevention, 3 under diagnosis, and then we can move to the next slide. And we have 3 under treatment and 4 under epidemiology. What I want to point out about the strategic goals is that they're fairly broad strategic goals. So the goals should not be specific to just one topic area. Instead, you should be able to take more of a mix and match approach where you can select any one of the topic areas under the internal medicine portfolio and have multiple applicable strategic goals that you can choose from, and vice versa. So there's not really a one-to-one correlation between them. It's a mix and match and choose your own adventure. So you can just choose whatever fits best and best speaks to the research that you want to propose. Next slide, please. This is the snapshot of the first 2 pages of one of our funding opportunities, program announcements, just to show you where you can find some of the key information. So on the first page, which is shown on the left-hand side of your slide, you can see at the bottom of that page are the submission and review dates and times. It's really important to take note of all of the various submission deadlines. So the most important ones coming up for you to take note of right now is the deadline for submitting a pre-proposal or pre-application, and then the deadline for submitting a full application. Then over on the right is the second page of the program announcement where the table of contents is starting. And just shown in the red boxes there are 2 really important parts of the program announcement. I highly advocate that you read the entire program announcement, but when you're trying to decide what funding opportunity is most applicable to your specific research, it's a great idea to take a look at the award information section of the program announcement, as well as the peer review criteria, because we have really specific bullet points that differ for each of the program announcements that tell the peer reviewers really what we were looking for with that specific opportunity and how they should score that one. So that'll give you the best comparison of how the mechanisms differ from one another and help you choose the one that's best for you. Next slide, please. This is just showing a snapshot of the peer review criteria from one of our program announcements. This is actually from the Discovery Award mechanism, which is one of our basic award mechanisms. And you can see if you look at that fourth bullet down that it has a point about to what extent the research has the potential to generate preliminary data that can be used as a foundation for future research projects. So it really gets into what the expectations are for a successful proposal under that mechanism. And then it's also important to take note of the ordering of the peer review criteria. Most often they're in order of descending importance. And I will give you a little hint that it's usually not research strategy and feasibility that is the top one. We usually rate impact higher than research strategy and feasibility to speak to the overall vision of both CDMRP and the PRMRP program. Next slide, please. This slide is showing you the programmatic review criteria. Unlike the peer review criteria, the programmatic review criteria does not change as much from one mechanism to the other. The thing I really want to highlight on this slide is that if you visit the PRMRP website, you can see a list of the FY24 programmatic panel members. So that's going to give you a list of the key individuals that are really going to play a role in making the funding decisions for this year. You can see what their various fields of expertise are and get an idea of, who you really need to be speaking to when you draft your proposal. Keep in mind that unlike peer review, the programmatic panel is going to have a little bit more of diverse expertise. And so it's important to keep that in mind when you're writing your proposal to not get too into using jargon that's really field specific. Next slide, please. All right, so this is probably one of the most important slides of the webinar. This is the funding opportunities that we are releasing for this year. So we have 2 opportunities under basic research, 2 under translational research, and then 2 under clinical trials or clinical research. So the first one on the list is the Discovery Award mechanism. This is what we refer to as our high risk, high reward award mechanism. Preliminary data is not allowed under the Discovery Award mechanism. It's supposed to be generating new data for an entirely novel concept, so not continuation of an already existing line of research within your laboratory. We want to hear your greatest new idea and something that, if it is to be successful, would really be a game changer for those affected by the disease or condition. Next, we have the Investigator-Initiated Research Award. This award mechanism has changed a little bit from what it was in years past. It is used to be open to all stages of research from basic through translational. So take note that this year it is limited to just soliciting for basic research. This is your basic validation studies. So it does require preliminary data. It is to be an expansion on an existing line of research to generate more data and do really solid hypothesis testing to generate data to support your hypothesis. Next, under translational research, we have a brand new award mechanism for FY24. Since we limited the investigator-initiated research award to just basic research, we added in the impact award, which is targeted more towards translational research or applied research. With the impact award, there is an option for partnering PIs. If you come in as a single investigator, it's a $2 million direct cost limit, or if you come in with a partner, it's a $2.6 million direct cost limit. However, the partner must be a clinician, someone that is involved in treating patients. The idea with the impact award mechanism is to take basic research findings and start translating them more to the clinic so that they become more applicable and specific to the targeted patient population. Then we have our Technology Therapeutic Development Award. Rather than being a hypothesis-driven award mechanism, this is more of a product-driven award mechanism. We commonly refer to it as our IND/IDE enabling award mechanism, since that is commonly what it is used for, is for the experiments and testing that is needed to get all of the data that you need to submit an IND or an IDE to the FDA. However, it can be used for any final stages of product product development. The important thing to keep in mind with the Technology Therapeutic Development Award is that upon successful completion of that award, if you complete everything that you propose successfully, your immediate next step should be a clinical trial. So moving into the clinical trials and clinical research, we have the Lifestyle and Behavioral Health Interventions Research Award. This award mechanism allows for clinical research or clinical trials for non-pharmacological therapies or non-invasive devices. It's looking for more of quality of life based interventions. Think about diet recommendations and physical activity recommendations and some apps that would not be tightly regulated by the FDA. And then we have our clinical trial award mechanism, which allows for early phase up through and including large scale multi-site clinical trials. And this can be to measure the safety, effectiveness, and efficacy and measure outcomes for any invasive or pharmacological intervention or anything that, even if it's a quality of life intervention, if it's too large of a study to fit under the Lifestyle and Behavioral Health Interventions Research Award. So I want to point out a few of the key things about all of the award mechanisms. For the first four on this list, everything under basic research and everything under translational research, animal studies are allowed under those, as well as clinical research. However, absolutely no clinical trials allowed under those first four award mechanisms. The second two, absolutely no animal study, or the last two, sorry, the ones under clinical trials and clinical research, absolutely no animal studies allowed under the Lifestyle and Behavioral Health Interventions Research Award, and no animal studies allowed under the Clinical Trial Award. Those must be human subjects research or clinical trials. I also want to point out the first five on this slide. So the Discovery Award all the way up through the Lifestyle and Behavioral Health Interventions Research Award. Those are going to be a simple letter of intent for the pre-application type, whereas for the clinical trial, it's going to be a pre-proposal, and you'll need to wait for an invitation for the Clinical Trial Award mechanism before you proceed with submitting your full application. Next slide, please. All right, so this is a great slide to keep handy once these slides in this webinar is shared with everyone. This kind of summarizes all of the deadlines to keep in mind for all of our award mechanisms. The deadlines for the pre-applications are very fast approaching, with the first set being due just this coming Monday on May 6th. I believe that's Monday, if I have my calendar straight in my head. And then the remainder of them are due ahead of May. Don't worry, it is not that much of a heavy lift to put in a letter of intent. It's just a simple one pager to give your general idea. So you should still have time to get those in after hearing this webinar. And then the full application deadlines range from the end of May through to the middle of August, depending on the different mechanism. And just remember to keep in mind that that clinical trial award mechanism does require the more extensive pre-proposal, where you have to wait for the letter of invitation to submit the full application. Next slide, please. This is just an overview of our application process. The important thing to keep in mind here is that there are steps for both the PI and the business official when setting up the account in eBRAP. That's our electronic submission portal, and you'll be submitting the pre-application directly within eBRAP. And then for our extramural performers, you're going to submit the full application through grants.gov, whereas those that are intramural to the Department of Defense are going to submit the full application via eBRAP 2. Please do not worry. There's absolutely no competitive advantage for getting submitting through grants.gov or eBRAP. They are all pulled together way before they come to us, really, even, or before they go to any type of review. And then lastly, we do have the verification period after the full submission deadline has passed. During the verification period, you can double check, make sure everything was done correctly by both the PI and the business official. However, do keep in mind that during that verification period, you cannot change the proposal narrative or the budget. So those are the two documents that you want to make sure are absolutely final before you hit submit and before that full submission deadline has passed. Next slide, please. So now we're going to give you some tips and strategies for success. Next slide. The one single tip I can give, the most important thing is to read the announcement really carefully. Like I said up at the beginning, we do not do individual one-on-one consultation with applicants to help them tailor their proposal. So we're really specific about the content in the program announcement. It has absolutely all of the details that should be needed to help you prepare a successful submission. So pay really attention to the language and the differences between the different award mechanisms. Remember to take a look at the peer review criteria. That's going to tell you exactly what the reviewers are going to be looking at, and you can make sure that you're hitting each one of those points that the peer reviewers will be taking a look at. Next slide, please. All right, these are a few just checklists. So I'm not going to go through every single one of those. I'm just going to generally summarize. As remember, I've hopefully hit the importance of impact several times through this webinar, said it enough times on the slides to get it into everyone's head that we really do care about impact. As bolded there, we want to know how the work is going to make a difference. We don't want to know just that you can do the experiments that you're proposing and that you'll get some data out of it. We want to know how that data, depending on the mechanism, it'll be either in the short or the long term, how that data is going to make a difference for patients' lives. And then remember for all of the award mechanisms to address feasibility. Even for the Discovery Award, which does not allow for preliminary data, you can still show that you have the right study team set up and that you have the resources all in place to do the research that you're proposing. Next slide, please. All right, planning and timelines. This one is really important. The Department of Defense is very, very strict when it comes to deadlines. So if we say that an application deadline is 5 p.m. Eastern time and something comes in at 5:01 p.m., we unfortunately cannot accept it. There is absolutely no grace period given, and there are no exceptions made for individual circumstances. So you all saw the great example today of there were some technical difficulties with compatibility of our DoD system with getting Dr. Dupache and myself onto this webinar. Make sure that you plan in advance for submitting your applications. Make sure you plan for any delays that might happen with uploading your documents. Make sure you plan in the event that you have some issues with a power outage or something like that, because there will be no exceptions made. The other thing is just to point out, the one time we will make exceptions is when there's a natural disaster, something that like a hurricane or a tornado or something like that is going to wipe out an entire region and leave them without power for an extended period of time. Then lastly, grantsmanship is always important. Remember that there are going to be consumer reviewers on both the peer and programmatic review panels. We ask for certain statements to be in lay language so that the consumer reviewers have an easy time reviewing those portions of the application, and that's what they're going to look at most carefully. So make sure you take that guidance to write in lay language very seriously. And then also remember the diverse expertise of the programmatic panel. So you don't want to be burdened down by jargon that's really specific to your field, and someone else, even though they're a scientist or a clinician, is going to have a difficult time understanding. Next slide, please. This is just showing you the landing page for the peer-reviewed medical research program and where you can find some key information. So if we go to that little inset box, if I can direct your attention there, a great link to click on is the recently recommended for funding link. That will give you the statistics. That's one of the most common questions that we're asked is, what is the success rate? So we don't give it for the program as a whole because it is really different from one award mechanism to the next, with some having about a 7% success rate and others having closer to a 20% success rate. So you can take a look and see the breakdown of what percent of applicants are normally recommended for funding, or at least based on last year, what that percent looked like. And then you can also see the FY24 programmatic panels. That little link is down below in that little inset link. And you can see previous year's peer review panels so that you can get an idea of what individuals we commonly recruit. Next slide, please. This is just a reminder, if you have not done so already, to sign up for email notifications from CDMRP. You can do so through either the CDMRP or the eBRAP website. Both listservs will take you to the exact same place. Next slide, please. And just to wrap up, I wanted to mention that there is an additional webinar series that is posted on the CDMRP website that is full of really great information. It's a little bit more general, tailored to a little bit more of a general audience than this one that was focused on more of the PRMRP program specifically. The general webinar series, though, is going to have things focused on like the high risk, high gain funding opportunities would be great for those thinking about the discovery award mechanisms. And then there's one for clinical research and clinical trials, which would be applicable to a lot of our mechanisms. So I really encourage you to take a look at those. Next slide, please. All right, that is all that I had in terms of slides. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Yes, it's great. We have a few questions that have come across. Thank you very much for all of that great information. The first is, are strategic goals and priorities the same thing?
So I'm not sure where the context for the term priorities is coming from. On the PRMRP program, we use the term strategic goals, and it's to illustrate that they are required, that you select one strategic goal. Other programs might use different terminology like priorities or areas of encouragement, and so it can differ how those terms are used from one program to the other. But for the PRMRP program, we call our priorities the strategic goals to illustrate that they are required.
Okay, thank you. And I'm reading from the Q&A box, so if anyone has questions, feel free to type your answers there, and I'll move on to the next one. Are partnering investigators allowed for basic research?
The only award mechanism where we have a true partnering award option is the impact award, and that's where both investigators, the initiating and the partnering PI will receive their own independent award. If you submit to one of the other award mechanisms, you are allowed to designate individuals as co-Is or key personnel, but there's not a true partnering option for any of the other mechanisms.
Okay, thank you. How about this one? Are we allowed to submit the same proposal for the discovery and investigator initiated?
Technically, yes. I mean, there is nothing that would prohibit that, but the same research should not be applicable for both of those because remember that the Discovery Award is supposed to be a previously untested line of research where there's no preliminary data generated, and the Investigator Initiated Research Award is for more mature studies. So if you have any data generated, if you have started publishing on the concept, then you want to go with the Investigator Initiated Research Award.
Okay, what do international applicants have to consider?
So international applicants are more than welcome and eligible to apply for all CDMRP funding opportunities. There are not really any terribly specific things that international applicants really have to consider. The one thing I will point out is that if you are recommended for funding and you propose any animal or human studies, you will have to go through DoD ethics. That's true for all applicants. However, the guidelines might be a little bit more similar for those within the United States to what your IRBs and IACUCs are already looking for, and it might differ and be a little bit more of a complex process for international applicants.
Are there any possibilities for European centers as a collaborative center or US one?
Yeah, so if I'm understanding the question correctly, European centers can be prime award applicants. They can also be a sub-award or a collaborator to an award that is made with the prime institution being within the United States or any other country. So everybody is welcome to be either from any country is welcome to be either the prime applicant or a sub-awardee or a collaborator. There's no restriction on country.
Okay, and I have a specific question. Let me see if I can get this right. It seems like the questioner would like to try the grant for genetic testing and APOL1 genotyping for patients with FSGS in low-income countries. So in which category is that included?
So unfortunately, we can't give really specific instruction for an applicant. I can tell you that FSGS, focal segmental glomerulosclerosis, is included under the internal medicine portfolio. That's the only portfolio where you're going to find that topic area. But as to what aspect of the continuum of care or what award mechanism or what strategic goal is most applicable to you, that's something where you really have to read and make your own decision, because it's ultimately going to come down to the peer reviewers and the programmatic panel, how well you make your case to those members of the panel that you chose the appropriate mechanism and appropriate strategic goal. And it's just not easy enough for us to guess what those panels are going to say or to really give a fair opinion based on a relatively short description of the research.
Okay, let's continue to dig down here. If nephrotic syndrome and FSGS are considered under the internal medicine topic area, does this mean that the focus should be on adult patients and not childhood nephrotic syndrome?
There's no restriction where it has to be included on adult patients or anything like that. We don't have a pediatric portfolio or anything like that. So it being included under the internal medicine portfolio was just, that where it most commonly fits, but you can research on either adults or pediatric versions of the diseases.
Okay, excellent. That let me see, those are all the questions that have come in live from this audience. I have another question coming in here. Are multiple PIs allowed or considered a strength?
So under the impact award, we do have the option for you having a partnering PI option. If you choose the partnering PI option, then that it is required that you have two PIs. Otherwise, you're submitting to the single PI option, and you do not have the option to have additional PIs on the application with you. So we do say in the funding opportunity how many of each type we expect to fund. It's not really viewed as a strength or a weakness. It's whatever is most necessary and is going to be the best team setup to get the research done that you're proposing to do.
Okay, and since the letter of intent deadline is coming up upon us, can you back up and touch on that and what really that should include, and should it be written in lay terms, for example, versus scientific specifics?
Sure. So the letter of intent is largely going to be used for planning purposes. Like I said, one of the main uses for that is for setting up our peer review panels. It is fine to write that in scientific language. It's not going to go to either any of the review panels. The letter of intent is just for program planning purposes. It is not reviewed. The exception is going to be the pre-proposal for the clinical trial award application. That's the one that is more extensive and requires the invitation before you submit the full one. That one should be really carefully tailored because it will be reviewed by the programmatic panel. And so it should be tailored to that group of individuals.
Okay, and if anyone watching is interested in participating in the pool of potential reviewers, is that an option?
Yes, so for consumer reviewers, there's an easy way for potential consumer reviewers to sign up through the CDMRP website and nominate themselves. For scientific reviewers, the best way for us to get your information, if you're interested in, is to pass your information to the advocacy groups for them to pass back to us. So we don't guarantee necessarily that you'll get signed up, but we will pass it on to our team that is doing the recruitment for the peer review panels to let them know that you are interested.
Excellent.
Oh, and I should note, please note that if you do get recruited as a peer reviewer, you will not be eligible to submit an application for the year.
And would you like to touch again on how many awards are given per each mechanism?
So it varies quite a bit from each mechanism, and each one is written on the specific funding opportunity, how much of each award mechanism we anticipate making. For the program as a total, we usually make somewhere between 150 to 175 awards a year, but the targeted number for each specific mechanism is within those program announcements.
Okay, last chance for anyone to type any questions in the Q&A box. But I do thank you so much for your time and for Dr. Dufache. her time as well today for presenting all this great information. We will be sending out the presentation and the recording of this webinar to everyone who came today. And I put my email, bdornan@nephcure.org, into the chat for any follow-up questions or outreach or engagement that anyone watching would like to do. Feel free to email me. And is there anything else that you would like to add that you think we may have missed, Kathryn?
No, thank you so much. I think this was a great opportunity to get to speak with the NephCure community, and I'm so happy you shared your email address. If you get questions from anyone after this webinar that you want to pass along to Cecilia and myself, we'd be happy to answer anything we didn't get a chance to cover today that way.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I know that give one-on-one consultations, but having you to answer questions today and follow up general questions, really appreciate that.
And the administrative type questions we can definitely answer if there's any confusion about that. We just can't offer opinion on, what's going to make your proposal better, but we can help clarify some administrative matters.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Wonderful. Thank you to everyone for joining us today.
All right. Have a great rest of the day. Bye, everyone.
Bye.